Hello, welcome to Color Light Motion, created and hosted by Victoria Vesna. I'm Bess Rocklitzer, president of the David Permeate Foundation. Today we bring you Ivana Dama. Ivana is working on her graduate degree at Yale University and has all along been behind the scenes for Color Light Motion. It is our privilege to have Ivana here today, giving her own presentation, From Zero to Infinity, Autopina, Zero Group, and their legacy on today's art. Please enjoy Ivana, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Bess, and thank you to the Berman Foundation for continuing to support Color Light Motion. We're starting a new series with the new lunar year of the dragon, 2024, with episode 22, when we feature Ivana Dama, a young artist who's really interested in sound and is focusing her talk on the group Zero and the work of Otopine that's in the collection. We asked her, as we always ask our presenters, to recommend a respondent, and she invited Ross Whiteman, who is working at Yale, and they share the space there, crossing over each other and sometimes discussing ideas around sound. So his presence was very welcome, and we also had a great group from UCLA. Anuradha Vikram, co-curator of Atmosphere of Sound, Sonic Art in Times of Climate Disruption that we're doing for the Getty Pacific Standard Time, was here, as well as a couple of artists who are part of that show. Anna Nacher came to us from Poland, Robertina Šebenic from Slovenia, Lena Ortega from Mexico came in. She will be writing about the project we're doing, and Gabriel Tolson, who is an assistant to the curators. Um, I think that what's really beautiful is the people that came together, including our audience. And in particular, we had a great moment with Sally Weber, whose work is in the collection. And that work is called Threshold to Singularity, a Memorial from 1989. Beautiful work. You can see it on our archive. Uh, what was wonderful about her joining is that we discovered she actually was a student of Autopine, and as a graduate student really gained so much from being in that surrounding at that particular time. It must have been so exciting. And to get her feedback about how the connection that she saw between what Ivana was talking about in her work, dealing with sound and war and sirens, and this kind of the embedded trauma from being a child in Belgrade when the bombing happened, to Otopine and the Zero Group actually growing up in the Second World War with the trauma and afterwards dealing with it, and trying to figure out ways to redirect this kind of violent energy that they were subjected to. So all this to say is that this episode is wonderful. You will really enjoy seeing this connections and this intergenerational reflection on some of these works that are in the collection and that remain to be influential. Enjoy.
Thank you, Victoria, and thanks for having me today. I have to say that this invitation came to me as a surprise, of course, from Victoria, because I've been working on this series since the very beginning of pandemic, and I was sort of working in production side of the Color Light Motion series, and was really impressed with people who were invited. So some of my favorite curators, some of my favorite art historians, and specifically media art historians, were part of this series, and some of my favorite artists, including Sally Weber, that's here today. So I am actually not just excited, I'm honored, and to be honest, very nervous to be here today, but I also feel a little special, kind of a privilege in a sense of starting this new series of emerging artists, and sort of setting this kind of the stepstone for that, which is kind of exciting, to revive some of pieces in the David Berman collection and see them from maybe perspective of like young artists like myself. So with that, I will start my screen share. I title my lecture From Zero to Infinity. And today I'll be focusing on Otto Pina's work and the work of Zero Group in general, and how that had effect on the art that's happening today. And I will feature some of the artists that are in the collection. I will also feature some of the artists that I personally worked with or had a chance to collaborate with in the past, or I'm hoping to collaborate in the future. So this series is titled Color Light Motion, but I added a little element of plus sound because that's something I will be focusing on today. And I also think that David Berman collection has incredible pieces that are actually sound pieces, but I just think that the sound was overlooked in the titling of the series. So I hope that that changes in the future. But I kind of had to add almost this plus sign as a reminder of that. So Zero Group was sort of a historical group that now is being more looked at in many different ways. But aesthetically, there is a lot of components to the Zero Group that I think are really important to some of the backgrounds and interests of aesthetic sensibilities that I'm working with. Although this group started in sort of 60s in the post-war movements, there was this disbalance of trying to create something new that I will sort of explain in a little bit. And I wanted to include, to kind of start everything with including quotes for Otto Pina itself. And he wrote this essay called Paths to Paradise, and these quotes are kind of taken out of that essay. So he wrote, and it was kind of like almost like a manifesto for the group. Yes, I dream of a better world. Should I dream of the worse? Yes, I desire a wider world. Or should I desire a narrow world? And so that kind of opens my possibilities as an artist. Yes, of course, we have these dreams and aspirations, and kind of how we combine them is important. And also the other quote that was the very beginning of their manifesto is explaining what zero is. So zero is silence, zero is beginning, zero is round, zero spins, zero is the moon, zero, the sun is zero, the desert is zero, the sky above is zero, and the night. So on the right side of this slide, you can see the cover of the book that I will be referencing a lot today. And this was the actually the cover of the retrospective exhibition of the Zero Group in the Guggenheim Museum that was opened in 2014. And funny enough, in 2014 was exactly the time when I landed for the first time, kind of when I had the idea that I'm coming to the United States to start my undergraduate degree at UCLA. But because the flight from Belgrade was through New York, I spent a few days in New York. And I remember going to Guggenheim Museum and actually seeing this exhibition myself. In 2014, I had no idea who Otto Pina is, and I was also not aware of a lot of work that was existing in the Zero Group. So sort of the title that I chose, subtitle that I chose for this slide is 43210, and that kind of sort of reflects this whole idea that they had about rocket launch and like losing almost this like this force of a rocket, and the really time that exists in between the 1 and 0 and before the actually rockets launches itself. So that's the space that they are sort of in a broad way interested in, at least from my perspective. I also included that one more quote, and I think that these quotes are helping me get into the head of these artists, because in a lot of ways I cannot relate to them, but in a lot of ways I share similar sensibilities to them. So one of the quotes that Otto also said was that one glance at the sky, at the sun, at the sea is enough to show that the world outside man is bigger than inside him. So I would just change these pronouns to possibly a human, and not be focused on men. And that's kind of one of the other issues of this group, that it was predominantly men and focused in Germany. The group started in Düsseldorf in actually 1950s. And their whole idea was to change the narrative that existed in the post-war era. They were trying to find something new, to find something autonomous, to start a new artistic beginning. And in a lot of essays that I was reading about the group, they were constantly using freeing art as a term, which in a lot of ways is kind of problematic today, because it sort of comes with this idea of optimistic future in the post-war era. But unfortunately, we all learned that that it wasn't that optimistic after all. But I will focus on just their ideology at the very beginning of my presentation. And this was the title of the exhibition, and I'm using it also as a subtitle in my presentation. It is Countdown to a New Beginning, and that was the title of the exhibition at the Guggenheim Museum. This countdown is exactly what I was talking about earlier, is exactly 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And some of these, I think I'm repeating myself in this slide, but I'm also just emphasizing the importance of this wave of optimism, as I titled it here. So it's the sort of utopian, idealistic, conventional ideas, and then the play of light and shadow, stillness and movement. And they're kind of contrasting each other to emphasize each other more. And also, I will just begin the lecture.
And as a painter,
with this video.
I used stencils, and from there came projecting light into space. The idea of the rasters just came from using lights that could shine through these perforated cardboard panels and metal panels. The development, the evolution of sculpture, of metal sculpture in my work.
So at the very beginning of this video, this was the interview that was done with Otto before the exhibition was starting to be kind of like laid out. And one of the things that he was constantly saying was that he started as a painter, but he wasn't using traditional sort of a canvas and paint and a brush. He was more interested in stencils. And I think the obsession that he had with stencils as a negative, positive space, and also the reflection of light, goes back to that cover of the book, again, of what we see through when we open the book. And sort of, I think that's the ground of his work and how he started thinking about these light ballet sculptures. Here are some of the other works in the same exhibition that I'll be talking about. But one of the beautiful things to me personally is that this specific piece, Light Ballet, it reflects in a lot of ways to the other work that he was doing later on. And so I will just move to the next slide, hopefully. So this sort of movement was in a lot of ways connecting groups of artists who shared similar either aesthetic sensibilities or interest in formal aesthetics. So when I'm talking about the formal aesthetics, I think their obsession with air really resonates with me. Their obsession with light really resonates with me. But more than anything, their obsession with vibrations is what is kind of important to my work that I'll be talking about later. So in terms of vibrations, I think that in a lot of sense, this is they're seeing the light as a material that can be they can fill in the room. Similarly to sound and similarly to air, it's almost the hard material to work with as an artist because it's hard to capture, it's hard to organize, it's hard to maintain. So I will go back again to my slide and just emphasize this inflatable project right here, it's almost kind of like this like visualization of this exact thing of trying to capture the air to give a form, to sort of just have that as a background. I also thought of the magazine that they started. It's of course called Zero Magazine, and specifically the issue 2 of the magazine is focused only on vibrations, and the work of artists that were focused on exploring this further. So in kind of engaging the viewers in multisensory experience was one of their very basic ideas. So they would say that they're creating environments that offer result in resonating energy or this vibration of light and movement that can be seen through kinetic works of art. Then the innovative use of materials, technologies to produce the works that were dynamic, and they try to kind of break the boundaries of artwork and the viewer and the environment in one space. So here are a few more things from the book that I'm using. And this approach kind of represents a significant, almost departure from traditional forms of art in a sense of static forms. So it is giving a new dimensionality to it and a new emphasis of change. And I think this idea of change really resonates in this work by Otto as well. And these are the round discs that he created, and there's 2 of them. One of them is called Raster Monde, and the other one is called Raster Sun. So these are the works that one of them refers to formation of sun and the other one of the moon. And he particularly chose to work with metal, and in the right side, he's using brass, and in the left side, he's using aluminum panels to sort of have even though these are the wall piece, they're not moving. The reflection of light in the space is the movement that he was particularly interested in. And so in this work, there are some elements of dynamic visual effects, and they're sort of intended to evoke an image of essence or of the sun. And so now I think that in this work, this is sort of a connection of intersection between art, nature, and technology. In a lot of ways, sort of resonates with the work that was done in a similar time by Paul Bury, titled Punctuation, where there's a multi-layer stencils that are moving with a simple motor on the wood panel, and they're revealing the image that also reassembles this kind of like almost moon phases. And on the right side is Marcel Duchamp's pieces that are actually in the David Bermond collection. And this is one of my favorite pieces in the David Bermond's collection because of potential for art to exist in places that are not just museums and galleries. And particularly, this piece was intended to be a home art. This is it was created with a very simple turntable-like motor, where the sort of audience or owners of these discs can replace them and have a different visual effects in their houses. So the movement that would be created by these discs was particularly inspiring to some of the artists that I will mention later on today. I also cannot possibly, in the very short lecture, I cannot possibly cover everything that the Zero Group did, and I also am missing a lot of names and missing a lot of works. So I decided to scan through the book just so we get the more this like kind of aesthetic sensibility of the group, that we get a sense of the work and maybe recognize some of the pieces from the previous works. And so even if while I'm looking at this video, I'm looking at Mokhri Naj's piece that was very inspirational to me as well. That's using movement and discs to reflect the light in the room. And I will also mention a few artists today, and one of them that is Roji Akeda. And I think that this sort of optimism that existed in the very beginning of the group is not something that we can talk about today, because right now is about 60 or I think 64 plus years since the movement started. And this sort of reality that we live in is, as we all know, less optimistic and less utopian. In a lot of ways, it's challenging for artists like myself to identify with the work of the Zero Group, specifically because of these kind of like issues of rejecting to create a work that has any sort of social and activist meaning. But I wanted to kind of emphasize some of the people who are working today who are definitely inspired, and they also write about the Zero Group a lot, and one of them is Roji Akeda. This is a piece that I saw in person at Venice Biennale in a couple of years ago, I think 2019, and it's part of his works titled Spectra. There was multiple Spectra pieces. I was particularly interested in this piece because it's emphasizing the environmental crisis that we are going through. So the artist decided to include enormously bright lights of fluorescent lights in the short gallery space, and there was almost like a hallway, reconstructed hallway that the audience had to go through and walk through to see other exhibitions. It was so painful to go through this space. People would hold their eyes closed. Some people would have sunglasses. But I'm also interested in this oversaturated creation that he did that would emphasize sort of dystopian approach to tomorrow. That's almost contrary to the movement, to the Zero movement, but aesthetically is so similar. On the next slide, I have David Roy, and he is the artist who was in the Artside Collective right now at UCLA, and he also graduated from the Yale Sculpture Department a couple of years ago. And David's works really resonates with me because of his multidisciplinary practice that sort of has elements of objects and sculptures, but also has elements of sound and music and experimentation. And I think that David is one of the people that I personally like to work with because of openness to try and experiment with new things. But one of his long-term projects is titled Black NASA. And although he has similar obsession with a lot of members of the Zero Group with rockets and this launching and the new tomorrow, David is also at the same time reflecting to the current a moment by sort of reflecting that there should be alternative NASA, and there should be space for people of color in these institutions. And so all of his rockets are created for peace. So he titles a lot of his work as Rockets for Peace, which is not a lot of times the way we are using rockets today. I will also jump into a few other works in the collection. Not in the collection, but other works of art that are really relevant. So this group is titled Experimental Jet Set, and they are almost building an online archive of the artists and designers who are really important for even today, or they started, I think, in Amsterdam, I would say like around the time of like 70s, but it's super relevant to today collection. So I don't know if you can see my screen right now, but I'm currently sharing a their website, and I'm just gonna open a couple of pieces more for this idea of the aesthetic sensibility. And I also think how important was graphic elements of the zero group that are reflected in today's graphic design. And after the experimental jet set group, I will talk about Alexandra Jovanic. That's actually, if I'm still correct, is hopefully with us today, and we'll have a chance to chat at the very end. Alexandra is one of my great friends and is sort of working with new series of work. And I wanted to show this piece in particular because it directly reminds me to the thinking of Marcel Duchamp and bringing this, bringing the art outside of art galleries and also using a simple rotation to create very complex movements. Here are some of the experiments that she was doing recently, and she was cutting out of these discs out of cardboard. We're potentially thinking about collaborating in the future and creating sound engravings, almost like a record, so they can be both visual and sound piece. But I will try to share. Just 1 second. I will try to share this website as well. So thinking about how the art is also reflecting the time that's created. Alexandra created this website where you can actually, every time you refresh, you have a new design. So the importance of generative art and sort of the endless amount of results. So I can only imagine what would take Marcel Duchamp to do these calculations almost in an analog way and to create one of these discs. And it was very time consuming and probably a lot of trial and error. But right now, the beauty of Alexandra's piece is that you can have absolutely endless number of these discs, and every time I'm refreshing, I'm having a completely new result. And that's something that is sort of important to me, is how do we reflect on the current times, but how we also look back at the past and look at what was done before, and sort of create important narrative between. This was, I just had to include this last minute into my presentation. This was at 9:41. I can see it on the clock in the corner. Me driving to campus today I'm currently located in New Haven. That's where Yale University is. So I'm sort of interested in, I will share how my work forms, but a lot of times I lived in California for a long time, and it was a different political environment that it is here in New Haven. So I just included this video that really upset me this morning of a group of men standing in front of the Planned Parenthood facilities. So I am also, I don't think that the work that Zero Group was doing is even possible today, because as soon as we walk outside, we just either have to isolate ourselves from everything, but as soon as we walk outside, there's just, we're bombarded with these different types of realities. So with that, I kind of want to share some of my personal work, and this is the piece that I titled, I don't know if you can hear us, although we're being very loud. And this was the opening statement in the Congress. One of the congresswomen was talking about the women's rights and the abortion laws in the United States. So I am personally really shocked that in today's society, we live in one of the most developed countries on earth, and that I feel that I have less human rights that my mom had, that when she was my age, living in Serbia and ex-Yugoslavia. So it's quite shocking how kind of a lot of times things are going backwards. In this piece, I was kind of interested in showing that in more scientific way because of difficulties to talk about these topics as a young woman. So I included a vacuum chamber, aluminum egg timer, and stainless steel table. And every time that aluminum egg timer would ring, we are not able to hear it because there's no oxygen inside of box. So actually, sound travels through air and requires air particles to um, for something to vibrate or resonate. And if we use the vacuum pump to remove that air, even though the object is ringing and producing the sound, outside experience of the audience is not able to hear that. So I sort of reflect that to idea of silencing these voices that we hear. Similarly, in this piece, is titled Audible Silence. I used two of these chambers and I placed the air raid sirens that are originally used to signal bombing in my hometown to sort of silence them again and talk about these almost like political oppression and like different positioning as myself as an artist in these topics. And then I will end my lecture today by sharing some of the research that I'm currently doing for the future piece and the piece that will be part of my thesis here at Yale. So I was recently visiting the collection of historical scientific instruments at Harvard University. And they particularly have a lot of pieces in collection by Rudolf Koenig, who is one of the really important makers and inventors from France, who developed a lot of basis for air raid sirens. In the research that I was doing for last couple of years, I'm also interested in how does the sound of air raid sirens connects to electronic music and development of analog synthesizers. So I was particularly looking into a relationship of the two, and I couldn't, as someone who was sort of obsessed with these things based on the background that Victoria was talking about it, and these like sonic memories that I had as a child living in Belgrade. I was really drawn to these opal discs, siren discs that are essentially just the pieces of cardboard. And these are some footage images from my phone while I was in the collection looking at these discs. So these are the discs that came with a series of holes on them. And if you spin one of these discs and you even have a light air pressure, even as a straw, you're using a straw and the disc is spinning, you can activate different pitch, and the frequency or how often these holes are showing on are being on the disc itself would change the specific tone. So I saw that there is a potential for sort of musical instrumentation in these discs.
Oh, that's much better.
So these are just the videos from my phone because I'm right now in the working stage of this project. So I included just some of the experiments that I was doing in the Wright lab in the in this machining shop at Yale University. So I do work a lot, as Victoria mentioned. I'm assistant director of the Art and Science Center at UCLA, and since 2019, I've been constantly involving myself into projects where I don't necessarily need a group of artists to talk to. I love spending time in science places and just hearing the way scientists think about solving some of the issues or their approaches, and then taking my own direction from there. So I started a series of now all different kinds of experimentations in the lab where we were testing out and trying out what would produce what kind of sound, what patterns would create what. And in the midst of that, my obsession with these discs grew into obsession into looking at disc itself, both visually and also sonically, is how simple it is to produce the sound. So as the disc spins, it's almost like interruption of the air, and it's almost like a blade that spins and cuts the air as it goes. So that simple movement again, and controlled air is something I am interested in. In the vacuum pieces, I'm also that I showed earlier, I'm interested in using the air as a medium. Although the pieces are talking about other social and issues, they're also purely using the sound and air as medium, as almost like a material. And that's how I see my sculptural work. I don't necessarily see it as like object making, because it's not so much about objects, but it is more about this materiality of sound and air. And so in all these experiments, I'm now including some of the renderings of how I'm possibly seeing this being resolved as a more like exhibition piece. So I'm thinking now looking back into our pieces of the Zero collection and Zero group, and sort of solving and dealing with similar issues that they had, but also thinking what are the things that couldn't be done when these original siren discs were created. So in 1800s, when Koenig designed these Opel sirens, they were working with drill press, and they didn't have what we have today, like CNC routers and laser cutters and whatnot. So I'm potentially interested in engraving different sorts of patterns and mapping on these discs that can have the meanings in the spacing of the holes. So I was thinking, okay, these siren discs were created to sort of as a kind of urgency signals, but I'm also thinking about them as like today, what are the urgencies that are happening right now? What are the issues that are important right now? And I'm almost like most of us, probably overwhelmed with news, overwhelmed with everything that's happening every day. So I cannot possibly cover every single issue. So what I decided to do is to create a collaborative project where I would invite different artists that are working with sound in a different capacity, and I would ask them to design a disc with something that's important to them. This can be ranging from ecological issues to social, economic, or racial issues. So I'm seeing the particular interest that I am interested in is that perspective that I have is very limited, and I'm aware of that. So I'm trying to open this up and create a playground for others to share what's important to them. And I learned also when I was really young how important it is to be around other people in the times of urgencies. So it's quite incredible how when there was a bombing of Belgrade, it's quite incredible how many people came together, and even if the neighbors didn't talk to each other, whatnot, when these sirens would be activated and you had to move to shelter, everyone was working together. So I do think that the potential for collaborative work and creating the work that's not just about a single artist, so kind of like looking what Zero Group was doing was really important to me, because they did, although they did work as individual, they had individual practices as artists, they also did a lot of collaborative works and a lot of works that was just for the movement. And I think kind of looking back at that and sort of creating these collections and seeing what comes out of it. So with that, I will wrap my presentation today, and thank you everyone, and I'm looking forward to our conversation after.
How wonderful was that? Hello, Nina. Nice to see you. I'll call you. And there's Lena Ortega. Everybody, please join. I really enjoyed this, Ivana. You know, this is a bit of a testament how when you work with someone and there's a community we have, you lose sight of how important their work is, and this is very much my impetus about inviting Ivana, that and also Ross for that, for coming in together to give a discussion. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about what Ivana showed, and I'll just say from my side that I'm repeatedly struck by the maturity of your work, and at the same time how events in your childhood influenced your whole way of searching for expression that now is probably more important than ever. And I said probably, it is more important than ever, because there are so many children as we speak who are having similar and much, much worse experiences. And one of the things that really struck with me, and I mentioned it even earlier, but I keep thinking about it, is that when you were describing to me being in this basement that was 3 floors down, you actually didn't hear these sirens. And I find that pretty amazing, that these vibrations, also what the Zero Group was looking at, the vibrations that we don't hear, are still influencing us, and how much we're ignoring it collectively, or a lot of people who are in charge are ignoring it. These vibrations are affecting all of us, even if we're 3 and 5 floors down, even if geographically we're miles and miles away. So thank you so much for that. It's really inspiring to me, and I'm sure to everybody else. So I'm going to pass it on first to Ross to give us your feedback. I'm very curious because I can see how you guys are really connected with your work.
Thanks so much, Victoria. Yeah, Ivana, so great to get even more background on this work. We spoke in your studio, I guess it was earlier this week, and you shared some of the ideas of collaborations and some of the ideas of the possible connections that different artists might have, whether that's importing kind of data structures or different types of mathematical structures onto these disks to describe something in this medium. There's so much here that I gained from hearing about Zero Group, especially the concept of the countdown. I wanted to talk about that a little bit because the countdown, it can evoke this excitement and this optimism, but also doom and fear. I think it's really interesting also relating that to like the medium, working with stenciling and cutting, engraving. You're playing with the concept of negative, positive. Are you thinking about these types of relationships? I know you're sort of focusing the talk on Zero Group's kind of optimism, and in the face, as you said, of today, there's so many things that are troubling in the world, and obviously back then there were too. I think now it's a bigger maybe part of the issue is, or not issue, but there's just so much information. I'm curious how you're kind of thinking about these things. I realize that you kind of very elegantly said, I want to collaborate with people to kind of get their perspectives, which will be wider than mine, which relates to that quote you shared at the beginning. I was wondering if you could kind of talk a bit about that, like playing with negative, positive, and kind of spinning it on an optimism or fear level, and also like in the medium, and things you've discovered along the way.
I think that's such an important question, because it's not just from the perspective of spinning these discs and hearing them, but I think from perspective of what that negative space and what the kind of positive and negative space and their relationship, similar to what the Zero Group was doing with light and sort of the light and shadow. So we need both to exist, and it's not one or the other. And I think that's really the beauty of working together with other artists, including yourself. I have to mention that Ross is one of the people that I invited to be collaborator on this project. And I also I just think that it's the crucial element for me personally is the kind of like the balance or finding the thread between. And a lot of times I'm struggling to understand the ideas. Like, let's go back to something you said earlier about the rockets and this kind of like launching and almost like the aspirational break free from something that was like holding us. So I relate in that sense to a Zero Group that they had this they had this huge urgency to break free from traditional art and to kind of explode almost and explore these territories that are unknown. Um, and they were also at the same time mirroring the era of space explorations in 60s. So we have at the same time, we have Russia, we have Solaris, Tarkovsky movie, we have in the same time 2001 Space Odyssey. So all of these aesthetic sensibilities, aspirations are reflected in the work of the group itself, but they're coming to me personally in the more kind of from more what, like, I'm thinking, what are we breaking from right now? And we are sort of, all of us are tired from ongoing. I'm constantly hearing we live in unprecedented times, and it's just absolutely always like this kind of like insecure and unstable times are just, it seems like not ending, and that continuation of it really makes me feel like this, almost like we need this rocket launch to to sort of break free from this. So in that sense, I do relate to the group in terms of rockets and kind of launching. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting also, like,
Oh, sorry.
sorry, if I could say one more thing, I just love that that you're kind of very elegantly like taking one of your main critiques of the group and like in your own work, expanding your own horizons of what this medium that you're working with can be. So for instance, like Zero Group, as you mentioned, like pronoun wise and kind of rhetoric wise is like very male dominant group. Same with like if you look at the Italian futurists and things like this. So I think it's really elegant that you're widening your perspective through these collaborations with other people via this medium, and kind of launching yourself outside of your own. We all have our kind of narrower visions of the world because we're all individuals. So I think that's really was really striking to me with your presentation. So thank you.
You. Yeah, and thanks for being here today.
On a lighter note, I will say that I found out secondhand through the Berman Foundation that David Berman used that piece as his coffee table.
Of course, yeah. I mean, that's quite incredible how.
It's very 70s also to do that.
Yes, and as I was preparing for this talk, I was looking in changes in installation that David Berman did over time. So I even saw, it was hard to find the videos from Butler Museum where the piece is right now installed, but from what I was able to look at the map, it seems like it's in the smaller room, so it's just one piece on its own. And I really think about that quite often, is how my first visit to Guggenheim exhibition of the Zero Group was so, I didn't know anything about that movement. I didn't know anything about the artist, but it was so powerful as a regular visitor to the gallery, of how that slowly seeing the light move and fill in the space, and how simple it was just one motor spinning a disc and sort of creating this the full room of light. So that was kind of like almost like a theater feeling.
Yeah.
Of line.
It's interesting you're bringing that up, because Christiane Paul, who was the artist in residence at the foundation, she was asked, along with David Famillion and Karen Moss, they're curators, and they all said, oh, this piece needs to have its own space. And when David Famillion and Karen Moss were there, they literally just made the room with best. Do you remember? That was a whole production too. But it made a huge difference, because when it was in a group open space, the whole reflection got lost, and that it's all about the reflection. It's all about the light. So you were just focusing on the object and not really getting the whole point, that it becomes immersive in this very simple kind of way that's actually gorgeous. So Anna Nahir is joining us. She has a question for you, Ivana.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, Ivana. Thank you so much for a wonderful talk and such amazing works. Frankly, I'm really moved by your work about silence women's voices, and I find it particularly relevant. Considering where I speak from. I'm in Poland, right? The country in Europe that has one of the strictest abortion laws, but just a couple of, just 2 months ago, basically 2 or 3 months ago, we had elections, and it seems like the situation changed dramatically for better. So there is hope, I must say, because this case seems to be really lost battle, but now it seems quite opposite. According to recent polls, more than 50%, around 56% of Polish people are in favor of legalizing abortion. So it really changes. I think this notion of human rights, kind of, all the issues around human rights moving backwards rather than, forwards is really interesting. But I have an impression that it can be back and forth, and that if we don't pay attention, it may really deteriorate, right? So also from this point of view, your work is just amazing. My question would be, did you think about the earth and the air and breathing as well in this work? Because it seems to me that it really ties in nicely with, my point of interest, which is, of course, breath and breathing. Because what I see in your work, how I read it, is that we're silenced when we can't speak. We also can't breathe. Sort of that would be very crude interpretation. So that would be my question. And just as a footnote, there was a wonderful work by Otto Pine commissioned in Minneapolis in 1976, red helium balloons that were flying, and this is amazing. I see certain connections with your work, because those balloons were shot by people who were kind of outraged by this kind of large scale contemporary work. So there was this kind of violence from the audience as well. And I think your work that I'm referring to is also sort of hinting at this kind of violence. So that's I'm moved. I know that I'm sort of chaotic, but I was just so inspired by your work that I have lots of thoughts, and really I'm getting ecstatic, almost ecstatic by what you presented. So sorry about being chaotic, but yeah, the question
Anna,
about air and breathing.
You're not chaotic. I actually feel that just seeing who showed up for you, Ivana, this is the beautiful thing, because it's really about community, and the community of artists who we are building are amazing people, and to have them actually show up, including Anna and Lena Ortega, it's just wonderful. So yeah, it's very inspiring.
It sort of comes back to a community that you, Victoria, started building more than almost 20 years ago now. And these people are part of my community now, but they're sort of coming from the Art Science Center. And Anna, I really appreciate your comment. I just briefly want to say that the balloon pieces are, I actually, at the beginning of the last year, I made an inflatable, inflatable structure as well. I wasn't aware that Otto was working on inflatable projects. It's something that I learned recently while I was researching to prepare for this presentation, and I was like, wow, there's so many correlations of things that I was doing. But I think it's unconsciously on the same wavelength and same thinking again about these vibrations and containment, it kind of goes back. I'm just gonna also briefly mention about the breathing that you asked. Breathing is definitely really important, and I'm sort of trying to bring that more in this piece with the disc. So I'm considering of sort of having almost like a tubes as a performers that I would breathe into these discs to just show at the very beginning of performance, to possibly show the simplicity of that is not a high-tech piece, that is very actually a bodily rhythm that can create the rhythmic structure, or like a base for these discs to spin and create a sound. So I'm very much aware of it, and I saw also that Clinton was here earlier, and we collaborated on a piece for Ars Electronica Festival in
He's
2000.
still here. He's still here.
So,
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
So we worked on a piece together that was just connected to breathing and kind of emphasizing the social economical injustices, and we activated the plants in botanical garden at UCLA, where we would touch them and they would send the Morse code signal that was kind of encoded about breathing. So it was kind of like this almost like sirens or signals sent by plants, that is the time to like kind of like wake up calls from that perspective.
That was a really wonderful piece, and early on they were just beginning their undergraduate kind of after Santa Monica College. Amazing. So Lena, welcome. Where are you coming from? Where are you beaming in from? Remind us.
Hi, I'm zooming in from Valle de Bravo in Mexico, 2 hours away from Mexico City, in a beautiful forest. And thank you, Ivana, for your presentation and for bringing the presentation forward with a critical perspective over time. That was, I really enjoyed that. I wanted to ask you about, I see that you weave vibroacoustics and psychoacoustics in your work to create an atmosphere that will bring forward social issues that that you care so much about. How does this happen? How do you do this weaving to create an atmosphere that will bring them forward?
So how can you expand a little bit more?
Yes, I see that you use vibroacoustics in your work, the effects on sound on the physical body, as well as psychoacoustics, the effect of sound on our nervous system and our memory. And you use both of them in your work, and you weave them together to create an atmosphere that will bring forward the issue that you would want to talk about. How do you do that? Like, how do you weave them together?
I think that's the question that I ask myself probably every day, but I can probably not answer this in a good way, but I will try to mention a couple of things that might be relevant. So while I was going to see this scientific collection at Harvard, and it's like all like science, it's literally located in a science center. I also looked on the right side, and they said that it was used for psychoacoustics. The person that is curator of the collection told me, oh, we actually, these discs were not part of the original collection at Harvard. They were moved to our collection from the psychology department. And that, I was okay.
That says everything. That answers your question, Lena, completely. That's pretty amazing.
As an accident, but I'm like, okay, of course, what else I could have.
Of course, yeah.
Sort of, yeah. So it's called Psychoacoustics Lab at Harvard, and they had a lot of experiments that were in. And I can share my screen right now. They were in 40s, sort of part of the initiative to reduce the noise of the pilots during the war because of the structure in the airplanes and whatnot. So a lot of Koenig's objects and developments were specifically related to this collection. And And I was looking directly into loudspeakers, I was looking directly into sirens, and some of the Koenig's inventions at the very early are trying to create devices for ears that would only allow you to hear one tone at a time. And they were then the sort of in the kind of neuroscientists now are investigating that, of like these isolations of tones and effects. And so there's just very little research because it's so hard to prove these things. So from my point of view, I have a strong just connection to analog music synthesizers, and I was really drawn into this structure of synthesizers itself, and I never knew why. I was not interested in any other instruments. And then as I was growing up researching, I learned that there's quite a few also women artists who were inspired by similar things. And one of them was talking about growing up in Blitz in UK. So we're talking about different geographic locations. And she had experience of hearing air raid sirens. And then later on, she's seeing that as like early electronic music because the sound waves are coming as a constant. And then everything you do with synthesizers, you're affecting that sound wave with effects, with envelope shapers, with whatnot. You're just affecting that one wave that's coming in. Versus the other instruments that when you interact with piano or with a violin, it stops when you stop. So it's kind of like that constant is lost. So going back to your question, I really don't have the answer, but all of these things are sort of connected and there's no proof. So that I'm not doing a scientific research and I'm not trying to sort of make the point off of it, but I'm kind of like interested in these correlations and mapping them in my own head. So I would say like I kind of solve them through mapping and through writing too.
So you could say it's more of a experience and a feel that you have, like if you feel it, and that's how you relate them. I know that, trying to prove it scientifically, I think it's one of the things that always puts, I mean, it makes things not have the weight that they should, or communication have the weight that they should, or sound communication have the weight that they should, because it's not scientifically proven, but it is happening. And those things, they do correlate in your work and other works that you showed. And at the same time, people have influence on their bodies with the vibration, and at the same time, influence also on their nervous system and their memory, and just so many different layers of reality that come together with sound, through sound, on different levels.
Right. And memory is something that actually is a recurring keyword with Ivana's work, in my opinion. But it's also, to your point, Lena, and in general, this idea of scientific proof, the problem is the methodology of science at this point. Very difficult to prove anything that's dealing with complexity. So the methodology is very reductionist, and when you start dealing with so many different aspects and disciplines and variations and invisible, visible, there's nothing that you can do in a reductionist way. And this conflict is really happening now in real time because science has reached a point where the methodology has to change. And this is where I think art and science can really start flowing together, and we can help in this process. I think there's a lot for scientists to get from that. Speaking of this question, Anuradha just joined us, and it's wonderful that you're here taking the time, Anu.
My pleasure, Ivana. It was such a good talk. I really enjoyed it very much. Love to see you do this. And I love this emerging artist. But I also wanted to shout out to sound, because our exhibition for PST Art is, of course, Atmosphere of Sound. So maybe we should consider renaming the series. Maybe we'll have a meeting about that next week. My thinking, I have so many questions and comments about what you've shown. I was definitely thinking about when you showed the perforated discs that make the sound for the air raid sirens, which is fascinating, by the way. It's in a certain way kind of similar to how, you know, a player piano or other mechanical forms of automated music are operated. And of course, we're thinking a lot now about artificial intelligence in art. So that was one association. I'm just going to give you some associations and maybe ask you to respond, Ivana, because I don't really think I can formulate a question at 10:30 a.m. on a Saturday. But the other question or idea that came to mind was around you're invoking Duchamp and Duchamp's optical art interests specifically. And I thought about what Victoria said about the exhibition of the Zero Group and the work that was in one way sort of aesthetically neutralized by the museum space. And of course, when we see Duchamp kinetic works, or really any mid-century kinetic works in the museum space, they're almost never operational. And they become objectified and entombed, I would say, in a certain way. So that's another point perhaps to respond to. And then the third was very interested in the piece that you showed involving the vacuum chamber. And I was curious about whether you had to do anything with the stainless steel table with respect to physical contact between the timer, the glass of the vacuum chamber, and the table producing any sort of vibration, or whether that too is sufficiently dampened by the lack of air. So that's it for me. Thank you again for this wonderful talk.
That's actually the last comment that you just made is what kind of is more obvious in the siren piece, because sirens are much louder. And so there's a piece of rubber holder that I made that is sort of like absorbing the vibrations of the siren itself. Of course, it's not perfect. There's like kind of like leaking sound, and I can share my screen and share the video documentation of it. But I think it's just interesting to talk about that as like, okay, again, we're going back to conversation of like, we don't have to hear it. And sort of like this, if you even touch the chamber, you can feel the vibrations, but they're transferred through sound, but they're probably on a smaller level, so it's not hearable in a gallery space if the vacuum is on. But going back to your previous comment, yes, about Duchamp, and unfortunately in the most museums we don't necessarily have a way to interact, and I think that's the beauty of this work, was the sort of like playfulness and trying out different discs. And right now it's like the rarity of these objects, and that's why I kind of like to share of what Alexandra Jovanic is doing in Belgrade, and this kind of generative. So how can we use something that was already developed, and almost going back to your first question about AI, how can some of these conversations enter designs of the discs? How can we make, now that we have digital fabrication tools, and now that we have all different kinds of designing and machine learning tools, how can we incorporate that into today's discs and today's urgencies? So I think that the Zero Group, if they were working today, I think that's what they would be also looking into. So yeah, you posted Alexandra's link in the chat. I think Alexandra is here with us. I hope she says hi. But yeah, that's the artist that I referred to earlier.
Yes, I can say hi. Hi all.
Thanks.
Hello. Are you coming in from Belgrade?
Yes, I'm coming in from Belgrade.
Great. So, you know, to the points that everybody's making, I just wanted to bring up something that you and I talked about, Ivana, with the sound of the drone, and the idea that if you hear the sound of a drone in our environment in the US or somewhere where it's safe, it's like, oh, there's a drone, and, you know, excitement. It's like, is it a video? Is it a film production? Is it a game? That same sound is horrifying in a war zone. And so the idea of memory and sound to me is very interesting when it's the same frequency, especially with so many kind of ideas of healing vibration. I feel that it's really about the context and the environment that gives even that sound frequency, the meaning. So I know you're trying to address that as well, but I'm just curious and I never asked you this until I saw you kind of really wrap everything up into a narrative. I'm curious how you see the audiences here experiencing what you're trying to relate about, the bomb sirens, for instance, which a lot of people never even heard here. Maybe there was a siren about an accident or, flood or something, but a natural disaster, but not real kind of violent attack.
I think that's a really the challenge of my work is sort of like how we often overlook the sound in terms of sonic memories or conflicts, and even right now they're doing a lot of research related to Ukraine and the war in Ukraine and how the drones are sort of more important in terms of like not more important but like more traumatic for people than air raid sirens, and
Oh, really? Wow.
how it's being often overlooked when we talk about the effects and traumas of the war and conflict. I do think that I am interested in exploring that further, but I almost don't want to create the trauma on other.
No, of course,
Of course, but and not intending that in any way. But I think it's these conversations and the issues are sort of like, for me, there's some so when they design these instruments, they design them with a very particular idea that people would stand on and leave. So if the air raid siren is on, it would physically activate nerves in your body to make you stand up. So there's definitely particular, that's why it's being used now. If you go to any nightclub in Berlin, they're using air raid sirens a lot of times to activate the crowds, and a lot of DJs are using the sounds of sirens to sort of like as like a powerful tool to control mass audience. So I think in that sense, it's really even though you didn't have the experience of being in a bomb shelter or being in these environments, I think it's also important to just look at the pure tonal structure of these sounds and to look at the pure vibrations that are coming from them. So in that sense, I think it kind of goes back to your connection at the very beginning, with these vibrations that we feel, that not necessarily is something that's just like through sound itself. I think it's more complex than that.
And we're joined by Gabe. Gabriel is also part of the Artside Collective and the Atmosphere of Sound work that we're doing right now.
Hi, everyone. I'm really still processing it. It was such a phenomenal talk. I think I've been fascinated by the Zero Group and by Otto and Hans Max specifically for a couple of years. But to hear the ways that their metaphysical explorations have filtered into such real and urgent, pressing contemporary issues of politics and war and violence through your practice has been quite fascinating. I think my only question for you is, what have you learned about navigating your own memories and kind of allowing them to appear in your work in a way which still allows you to maintain your center and provide a kind of a rock and a voice for the viewers of your work? What you've learned about your own process in reflecting back on these works you've created, what it's taught you about your own upbringing, and I guess I don't know. I have less of a question and more. I would love to hear more about just what it means to deal with such poignant, visceral, and painful realities of war in a practice which can often be so healing.
I think it's like really, thank you for being here, and I think it's really a great question. But I sort of like, I will just kind of frame it back to, I think that artists a lot of times are like children, and that you are treating your studio space as this like kind of like mad scientist lab or like experimental place. So a lot of times 99% of my work comes from play, and this sounds pretty maybe it doesn't sound great to say that if you're dealing with such important issues.
No, it's great to say it, especially when it's important issues.
So a lot of times I'm trying to experiment and see what are the things that bring my attention forward, and sometimes sometimes they are these connections that happen, and like for example that I didn't include it in my presentation, but that inflatable piece that I made, I don't think I didn't have any like sort of thinking how it's related to this, but then it later on starts making sense. And I always think about these connections that happen afterwards. And I was in 2000, one of the collaborators that I'm inviting to design these discs is Robert Aiki, who is like a great composer working primarily in New York City. And he will be designing one of the discs, but importantly, we met each other in 2018 when I was passing by the store in Brooklyn called Control. Out of all titles, the name is Control. And I was just drawn to it visually. I didn't know what the modular synthesizers were, and I didn't even know that they had a modular synthesizer. So I just walked into a store and I talked to them that I was using some softwares based like Max, MSP, and other softwares, and I was like talking to them about that, and they're like, oh, if you like that, then this is gonna make so much sense. And I was like, oh yeah, but I don't know anything about this. And then 5 hours later, I was still in the store playing with the synthesizers, and I was just purely as a almost like kid-like or like animal-like. You're attached to something, you can't explain why you're attached to it, and then years later these connections start making sense. And then I think actually Victoria sent me this documentary called Delian Mode that is talking about Devashir's work and in relationship to her traumatic experiences in UK and how she integrated that into, like she's one of the pioneers in electronic music and how that made into the work. And then you're watching other connections, and like another documentary was like Sister with Transistors, and all these women that are talking about early interest that they had in electronic music and how they entered from science labs to this scene that was not open for women at that time. So I do think that all these connections start making sense later, but they come to me as like playful experiments that, and thank you, Anu, for including all these references in the chat as I speak. So I appreciate that. So hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you.
And Robertina is joining us, which is wonderful. Robertina is part of the Atmosphere of Sound exhibition, and she's going to visit us next week, and I'm going to bring her into my class along with Lena Ortega, which is fantastic that both of you are here. And Aysen Karacasin will also join. So it's a wonderful group of a new generation of women with transistors. Did you want to say something, Robertina?
Yeah, first of all, congrats, Ivana. Like, I'm really happy to also finally have this time to listen to your practice also, because, you know, with Ivana, we have been in different constellations since you and Victoria Vesna collaborate so closely. So it's also nice to hear what you're actually thinking, doing, and what is your way of working. I think the combination of playfulness and heavy topics is anyway needed, because, you know, topics which you addressed, you know, especially the memories of the wars and all these different traumatic situations can be sometimes too heavy to go through it otherwise. Like, I'm also coming from Balkans, from Slovenia, so growing up in the wartime, you know, this kind of saying, yes, we live in the unprecedented times. I don't know, it's happening for me since I was 10 years old. So all these kind of changes and changes of the systems and living in different constellations of that, I think is also kind of a bit resonating with my art practice, but also in general, you know, with the backgrounds which I'm coming from. So just to reflect to this, Ivana, what you have been saying, the this playfulness, I think it's very needed, you know. And I
agree.
And I think all of you, like especially the ones living in LA, can relate with the earthquake situations, because this is also this kind of something which I experienced, the one together also when I met Lena Ortega actually the same year. In Mexico City was this heaviest earthquake, and one of the really strange experience, just like on the personal note for me, was that I can't remember the sound. And I was there and I was running out, and I'm pretty sure it was super loud. But kind of, and this is the thing which I think, Ivana, you have been addressing so beautifully inside of your talk, and I would just like to reflect on that, is the thought on self-protection in the contrast to the control. You know, like where the self-protection is kind of the needed situations that you can work through it, and where the control starts. And this is also something which I'm also many times rethinking when you have been speaking about this before. I don't know if I make sense, but where do you reflect yourself with that, you know? Because one thing is, you know, as you have been also in this kind of, when you speak about this trigger situations of vibrations of presence of something. And I think this also reflects to the drone situation, because I was reading a lot about into this, how the presence of the drones, what was happening in, because if I'm correct, but maybe I'm wrong, they have been very heavily introduced into the more military actions during the Afghanistan situations and so on. So it's happening already for a long time. It's just depending where in geography of the world we are more or less aware of it. And it's either more on the scary side, on this side. Like for me, you know, always when I hear the sirens, it triggers me a bit, because it reminds me on the situation in Mexico City, you know, and here they're just doing the test for the something. So yeah.
Exactly. Thank you for comment. And I constantly think about. I mean, it's really bizarre how one time I was with a friend in a car accident, and there was a really dumb song that we were playing on in a car, and so all of a sudden that song became like a buzzing sound, and you don't hear it anymore, and then you come back and you're like, I can't believe this. Like, you know, if something more dangerous happened, this would be the song that was playing at that time. But in the very particular moment, you don't hear it. You almost like something that you mentioned earlier, that there's like this, like, I don't remember it, or there is the moment of like being like almost like numb, and your senses are your body is just responding of like how fast I have to react to this element of urgency in the body. And that's something that again goes to your idea of control. And this like I did work with I was interested in like looking into eye movement and how we think that we're in control of our body, and then we have this involuntary blinking that we can't control. So I always look in these moments of how we're not aware of these. You can only go so far without blinking. At some point you have to blink. So I'm interested in that very much so, in our perception of control, and also these utopian ideas of controls that kind of, and Soviet era and everything. So I'm just grateful. I don't think I can answer this in a short time.
It's a longer discussion.
Discussion. So nice to have you, Robertina. Thanks for being here.
And Sally Weber, I'm so happy you joined us today. Wonderful artist who's also part of the Vermont collection.
Well, it's great to be here. And Ivana, your work is fantastic. Congratulations. It's really succinct and very elegant. And that's always a sign of, as Victoria said, it's both a maturity, but it's also subtle. And then it hits people straight through the solar plexus. They get it. They don't need to think about it. They don't need it to be emotion. They don't need it to be anything. That's part of kind of real communication. So I really I really loved what you're doing. I have a couple things to add, and one is about Otto. And I think trauma was actually what inspired him and the Zero Truth group. And because they were all growing up, of course, during World War II and the Nazi era, he was a Nazi youth. And this was, you know, tremendously disturbing to him. And I think that part of the 60s was countering that kind of negativity. So the exuberance they were trying to bring back to a new world was coming straight out of that. The sky art inflatables were inspired by the bombings and what they looked like in the sky. So they were directly part of that experience and trying to redirect that emotion into something positive. And certainly when he incorporated, or he worked with Mormon and and all the other artists in the sky art events, that was part of redirecting that kind of energy. Basically, the 20th century has been, you know, a century of trauma and wars straight through. And I'm sorry that you've had to go through that on a personal experience, but your way of seeing through that is what's helping other people today, you know, both older and younger than yourself. Because it ain't gonna stop anytime soon, we're afraid. The other just quick comment was, I'm sure you've looked into phonographic discs that are about the same size that you've seen there. Some years ago, we were at someone's house and they had a collection of these. And so they came out, you know, a little after the Edison reels and the Edison cylinders as another way of like having a mechanical phonograph. And so the sound, and in collaborating with your other artists, there might be voicings and music and things that we can do now with AI or through some of the other technologies that will allow a broadening of what we can put onto something and still have it as beautiful as what you've already been doing sonically. And so the sonic and the visual are so well connected that there is no distinction. And I think that's what you've done so masterfully. So I don't know, those were just some thoughts. I think you're doing fine. I don't have anything to ask because you're already doing it. So thank you.
Thank you, Sally. I just want to mention that I was really, I knew of Sally's work before we met when you did your episode for Color, Light, Motion. And the work that you were doing at MIT was really inspirational to artists like myself and a lot of people who were at the same time in the school with me. I just going to very briefly comment on the sort of this historical element that I really kind of overlooked in my talk, and I think it was important. More the perspective that I was thinking is that I wish it was talked about, because oftentimes our history is not talking about actually all three members of starting members of Zero Group were in military themselves and had some sort of military training or experience. And I think all of these conversations about the time and reflection on the sort of the art is reflection of what's happening outside as well. And I think a lot of times we think about the protest in more direct way, that we have to kind of be loud and be outside and kind of, and like, I don't know, like do something. But I have a feeling that there's many different ways to deal with these complexities. And some of them are, if we look at the non-Western thinking and traditions in, like, I don't know, even Buddhism, and how a lot of times is about centering, and that the protest can be as quiet and internal, and that these kind of different approaches to same exact source. So I'm not just my main critique of the Zero Group was primarily sort of on how little it was talked about, that the idea was start fresh, start new, and kind of like reconstruct from blank. And I think a lot of times you're building off of each other instead of like, you know, starting from zero. But
No pun intended.
Yeah, that was perfect. Well, Sally,
Well,
I'm curious if did you meet Otto? Did
I
you have a
studied with
chance?
him. He was my advisor.
Wait, you didn't say that.
Yeah, he was my advisor at
That's
MIT.
amazing. So you need to tell us
Yeah.
more. Tell us a little more.
Well, he was a force. You know, he was a real force at the center, and he was the one that spearheaded the whole Sky Arts program, much to the chagrin of many of the artists in the program who were fellows, because, you know, everybody was, you know, going into lots of different directions. And so suddenly, while I was there, before God, that he was trying to bring the center all into one kind of collaborative to pull off these festivals. There was 3 of them, and it was to bring artists and scientists and technologists all together. So it was the beginning of this whole program to, even though it had been going for quite a few years, it was the beginning of bringing a number of people together to have a conference, basically, to have a conference and talk about all these ideas. And of course, at the time, art and technology was not part of the major art world the way it is now. It was very much a side field, and the idea of trying to be noticed by, as artists working in a field, was sort of not on anybody's mainframe, especially from New York. So even though we were in Boston and New York should be a tight connection, it really wasn't. But the whole idea of bringing in people like Morrison and Van Sant and all these major artists, as well as Namjoon Pike, who was a close friend, and a lot of artists worked together. A very close friend of mine worked directly with Namjoon for a long time. This is just what they did and what we did. I was a student, a graduate student at the time. So there was a small graduate student program and a number of fellows. There was probably at least 30 fellows or something, 20 to 30. And then there was 4 or 5 graduate students each year. So, but what that did for us as graduate students was give us access to the Institute, which was an incredible boon. I mean, to me, it was allowed me to explore things I couldn't have done anywhere else, because I was looking for access to lasers. I was trying to figure out stuff about holography. I had worked with a woman named Harriet Kasdan Silver, who I took a night course with, which was what introduced me to the center. And that got me into holography, but my interest in solar and my interest in sunlight and archaeoastronomy at the time is what shifted that into a whole different direction. So, you know, at the time, I didn't know Otto's work at all. And it wasn't until later, and I did see the exhibition at the Guggenheim, which was excellent. But Ivana should know, if you're at Yale, his archive is up in Massachusetts, and with his wife, and there's a possibility perhaps that if you're interested in something specific, I could try and get in touch with them and see whether there's an option if you needed to gain some access, for instance, if that would be helpful for some of your research.
Of course, it would be helpful, and we're, you know, the big.
And there's the cat. Of course, the cat had to show up.
Wonderful. I love that how you picked it up. But I was just starting to say that the whole point of even today's program is to show how the very new generations are taught, have this lineage. And just as even as work as an example, a lot of it comes from the unconscious. A lot of students of mine kind of do work that I know has happened before in a different form, in a different time, a different technology. So to bring in this collection and just show that lineage is so important, and these stories are critical. Unfortunately, a lot of the artists we weren't able to access directly, like Otto, he passed away too soon. But we have someone like you who's an amazing artist, but then has that lineage and has that direct relationship. So we get to hear these stories. It's quite wonderful. And the idea of cross-generational, intergenerational is also so great because you have some very kind of powerful, instinctual kind of movements, and that's connected to layers of experience and knowledge and histories. It's great. And Carol, I'm so happy that you hang in there. I know you have an event, so you're amazing to do this. But Carol Hark, you're just really a force yourself.
I'm going to try and activate my microphone. Hopefully there's no feedback. But
you're doing good. You're doing
really
good.
Enjoyed having Ivana as an artist in residence. I think it was last year or the year before. So she brought her newly discovered synthesizer love to the piece that we showed on Governor's Island. So we're hoping to work with Ivana more in the future. And I had no idea it was her first time at Control. That was awesome.
So we're collaborating on the atmosphere of sound art in times of climate disruption with Harvest Works, and a big idea is to connect East and West Coast. And there's such a boom of artists, and it was really hard for Anuradha and I to just narrow it down to what we can do, just physically, budgetary, etc. So we did decide to come up with a symposium, performative symposium that will be in 2025, where it's a bit of a marathon, just everybody coming together, making noise, white noise, pink noise, good noise, bad noise, whatever is happening, just to kind of put it out there and work with the light. And this has been so delightful to me, really close to my heart. And even we're so grateful to you for being there, for being one of the community. And as Pauline Oliveira said, we're not here to build careers, we're here to build communities. You're really showing that. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. Ross Whiteman, thank you for joining and being part of this. Sally, your last words were fantastic. Anna, everybody else. It's just such a great community that came together here that it really is warming my heart. Thank you, everybody.